Do what you gotta do. Is it cold back there?
Oh, absolutely.
Alright, oh, we're recording. Okay, so we're gonna do a little Redux. I'm gonna kind of walk through this in a way that I would if I had never seen Redux before, ish, and kind of refer to the documentation and all of that kind of stuff. So let's just use our buddy create React app, which I've been liking more and more. I mentioned in the past that I used to use a generator called app. I actually, like, create React app has gotten so much better than it was when it first came out that I used it myself for something recently and I just stuck with it, so I'm happy with it. I'm just gonna call this mini Redux. Cool. So let's get this go up and Atom, Chrome. What is that? Oh, I opened my whole developer folder now.
I did that yesterday.
Not what I meant to do. CD mini Redux Atom dot. There we go. Let's do a little. Oh, create React app. So now we've got an initial commit to work from. I'll go ahead and push it to GitHub too. Cool. Okay. I'm not going to worry about rearranging all of these too much. I am going to clear out some of the default stuff that they put in here, right? With actually, you know what? Maybe I'll leave some of it so we got some styling. I'm just going to get rid of the spinning logo because it drives me kind of crazy. We'll say welcome to Redux. And let's start our app up. And while that's starting, let's do the split to the right and to the left. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to kill this over here. I'm going to open a terminal window here so that we can always see the terminal messages on the bottom. This is an Atom package. Just like that little terminal in Atom. So I can see these warnings down here. Okay. So welcome to Redux. Giving me a warning that logo is defined but never used. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that there. Great. No warnings. Let's go Redux. Actually, hang on a second. Redux. Get rid of that. Let's go get the Redux logo. I'm going to go to the Redux README, which I was going to do anyways. I'm going to copy this image address, put it here. Yeesh.
Now it's spinning.
That's not the logo I wanted. I just wanted the little one. Oh boy, whatever.
Why don't you just take it off the CSS to spin?
Yeah. All right.
You can take legit.
Yeah. And where's our background color? Let's make this a different color. There we go. We're gonna Redux. Okay. Random colors. Okay. Beautiful. So what we're gonna do is first we're gonna do the sort of basic like click a button and count. Right? We're gonna build a counter. So if we were to build this here with state, and let's go ahead and build it first with state. Say you have clicked the button. This dot state dot count times. See what this looks like over here. Rut row. Oh. Right, so state count is 0. That's it? Okay, cool. Cool. So here's our button. Click me, and we want that number to go up. So to do that, we need to add an on click to this. And we'll say this dot click. And here, underscore click is going to be a little function. And we'll say this dot set state. And we're going to set count to be the old count plus 1. So now that works, right? Just plain React. So let's add Redux to the mix, and you're going to see that the Redux way of doing this is much simpler, but the Redux way of doing this is much more complex. However, it scales much better to bigger problems and more complicated apps, where you have lots of states spread all over the place. And before we do that, I'm going to break down. I don't have my. I'll just do it. I'll just write it in code here. Let's clear out the README file.
Why is it better?
So I'm sure y'all have experienced a little bit of in an app where you have some state and it needs to get passed as a prop, as a prop, as a prop, and then you have over here as a prop, and then you want to change it here, and you need it to change over here too, but the state lives up here. So you've got to pass a bunch of functions down as props everywhere, and it starts to get a little bit messy to keep track of. That's where the built-in state in React stops scaling well, whereas Redux takes all of those changes and gives you a specific place to put each part of it. So that no matter how big your app is, there's a place for where you make changes to the state, and there's a place for where those actions go, and you can call those actions from anywhere, and you can use those state from anywhere, and it doesn't impact anything how it's organized. Right? So you end up being able to build very complex things, but your reducers are just your reducers, and your dispatchers are still just your dispatchers. Like, as complex as this is going to get to add this now, it doesn't get any more complex than that, right? It stays at that level. So you have this like small ramp up, and then it plateaus in difficulty. Whereas state in React starts off really easy, and it ramps up, and it never stops ramping up in terms of how complicated it gets. So props versus state. Let's have a short little conversation about that, right? So when you have a component like this, let's say you have a component called multiply, and it takes, and you want to say A is 4 and B is 2. Then I expect that this would render, I'm going to backtick here with JS. Oops. I would expect that this would render 8, right? That's sort of like I've got a component that just it takes those two props in and renders 8. If we start thinking about components as functions, then what props are will help us make a lot more sense. Let's look at the same thing as if it was just a function, right? That is the same thing as this, right? If we were to call this function, it would return 8, right? So props are basically arguments to a function. They come in from the outside. Our function, this function doesn't care where A and B came from, and it can't change what A and B are outside of itself, right? Only inside it can deal with things. So props are just like parameters, arguments to a function. It's exactly what they are. So if that's the case, then what is state? Product, in this case, is state for that function. Inside that function, you can change, you can do whatever you want to do. But when that function's done, like it doesn't change anything outside of that function. It's contained within its function. If we return product, then we can pass that along as props to something else. But those things can't ever change what product is inside this function because it's inside that scope, right? So state is like internal variables scoped to a function. So make a little note here. State props. So if we were to compose a function like, let's say we were to compose a React component like this, like one called square, and you're going to square the number n, and I would expect this to return 16, right? Then what might that look like inside, right? Square. Square. Oh, are you messing with me here? I bet if I do this. No? Okay. Whatever. Be consistent at least. So if we were to have this component, right, you can imagine what that would look like inside. Like this component here would just call that. This is the exact same thing as if we had written a function like const square, takes an argument n, and returns multiply n and n, right? So if it passed n and n as the arguments a and b, right? So we're taking here. Let's see, product. So now we can kind of have like this idea of state here, right? So there's the props that came in as an argument. You did some work with them internally, right? By calling this other, right? Does it kind of make sense how props are like these arguments that come in from the outside, and state is something that's inside of a component. And if you start thinking of React components as just functions that call each other, and that the props are arguments that you pass through, that's it. That's how that's literally how React components are really built. That JSX, those tags that you write, those just get turned into function calls, and you're just passing and the props are just arguments passed to them. That's why we can actually write our React components as a function that receives the props as an argument. That's literally what they are. So it's just a kind of a way to think about them that hopefully will help props and state make more sense. And one thing is, you will always use props in React. State is something that once you start getting into more complex apps, you stop using the built-in way that React handles state, and you can use something else to manage state. You don't have to use it. But props are like a core permanent part of React. So props are like parameters to functions, and they're permanent. It's an alliteration to my device, maybe. I'll put it, Brian. All right. Anyway, so this app component, right, has this internal state, but we're going to move this state to Redux. Is what we're going to do for this.
Will the set state, the set state, will that usually rest in our app.js? Or can it kind of?
It'll rest in the component that has that holds this, that changes the state, or the component that has the state, right? So a lot of times you want to put all your state in app.js so that the state is in one place and can trickle down as props to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that that gets tedious when you need to pass everything down, and so that's where the whole connect thing in Redux comes in, to mapping Redux's state to props for specific components. So hopefully we can make some sense of that here in a minute. So let's read. Whoa, nice sidebar. Nat. I didn't mean to go here. I meant to be here on this page. There we go. Okay. So npm install Redux, but he also says if you're doing React, you might want to install these. So let's do that. I'm going to use yarn though. So if you can't see down at the bottom, I'm just typing yarn add Redux and Redux React-Redux. I am not going to install the Redux DevTools in this package specifically, because you can actually install those from the Chrome App Store and have it built in here.
What is the benefit of having the Redux tools?
You just don't have to configure it in your app. It uses the one that's already installed in Chrome. And I'm wondering though where my React tab is. That's weird. Oh, I always do this. I look in the wrong place. Yeah. Where is it? More tools, extensions. Oh, they're on. Oh. I don't see React in there.
The animations one. The Redux, more tools.
It's not scrolling. No.
Weird.
Yeah, it would normally be like right. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, let's open it up here. Oh, there it is. Okay, whatever. Whatever. Maybe it hides itself now if it doesn't see React on a page. It didn't used to do that. Oh, look, there's our state with our count. Look at it. I can change it. Cool. Okay, so we've installed now. Let's go ahead and start this back up. And let's sort of walk through what they provide. So this example here, right? Import create store from Redux, which lets you create a Redux store. Then you have this function. This is important. This is just a plain function. It does nothing special about it. It takes an argument for the state and it takes an action, right? And then what you do is based on the action, you return the state modified. That's core to how Redux works. This function is what's called a reducer. And what the reducer function does is you have one function in your app that takes the current state and an action and it returns a new state. Maybe that action didn't change the state at all. Maybe that action modified the state in some way. It doesn't matter. All you do is write whatever logic you want in that function that returns, based on that action, what the next state should be. And this is the entire state for your application. It's just one object. And it can have as many keys as you want, and it can have keys with more objects, with more arrays. That's one object represents everything in your application. It gets passed to a reducer function with every time an action happens, that this function gets called with the state and that action, and you return what the next state is going to be. Yeah. Set state is like a combination of those ideas. So set state is like, here's the state, like it already exists, this.state, and if I call this.setState and I give it an object, the keys, let's say your object, your state has like 4 keys in it, right? And you call setState and you give an object that has 1 key, it'll just go and replace whatever is at that 1 key with what you gave it, and it just kind of does that. Yeah. So in React, your state is basically expected to kind of be an object. In Redux, it doesn't matter what your state is. Your state could be an array. In this case, the state is just a number, 0, right? And the reducer function, and they explain here about this is a reducer, right? It takes the existing state and it takes the action, and based on the action, it returns what the new state is going to be. So either the old state plus 1, the old state minus 1, or in case you didn't specify increment or decrement, it just returns the existing state.
And then how would we write if we were trying to give that like 0, if we were trying to make that into a key value?
Yeah.
How would we write it?
So you could write, let's say, because like here's my I'm going to keep, when I do mine, I'm going to keep mine as an object for us. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this in this file, because that's, I think, the simplest thing we can do is do this right here in this file. So I'm going to say import create store here. I'll go ahead and I'll copy paste this, and I'll write it right up here, except my state is going to be count 0, right? That's my initial state. And I'm going to return this. It would be, right, this old state. We could, well, maybe for clarity's sake, we'll call this old state. Old state.count. Oh, sorry. This should be count. Count.
So this I need to be able to put count instead of this last state at count.
Yeah, because in this case there's no this here. What I'm given is the state itself, right? There's no this attached to it. I'm not talking about this on my component. This is just, you can look at everything that it does right here. Action is obviously going to be an object that has a parameter here that has a property called type. I'm switching based on that. This is a common pattern that people do in Redux, to switch based on the action type. You don't have to do that. You could just write this as one. You could do whatever you wanted in here, right? This is just a common pattern. So I.
Does it mean we can do whatever we want? Like, for organization purposes, or?
Yeah, yeah. How you decide. The point is that this function will. Let me write this. For every action, this function will receive the current state and the action, and should return what the next state should be. How you decide what the next state should be, that's up to you. This practice, though, of switching on the action type and then doing the work that changes it based on that right here is pretty common, because your action is going to probably be an object that has a type. It doesn't have to be. Redux doesn't say we have to do that. I mean, we could just say that the action is that string. Actually, let's go ahead and do it like that first, and we'll kind of come back. So action here is just going to be a string, okay, when we call it. So let's do this. Let's say let's store equal. So we're creating a Redux store, and we're giving it our reducer function by name, right? So now,
That's just holding the state of whatever.
yeah. So store.subscribe, right? Then we give it a function that says console.log store.getState, right? This means every time that the store changes, this is going to get called. So let's just do this for now, right here, and then we'll see how we have to tie it to React in a minute. And then when we click on our button, so we're going to get rid of the state internally here. For now, I'm just going to put in here because we don't have state. What I'm going to do is I'm going to store.dispatch. And remember, this was an object with type on it. What we're going to do is just make it that, just a string, because we kind of assumed it would be a string up here. So let's see what happens in our log. We click the button. Whoops. Oh, I guess I lied. I guess Redux does say it has to be an object. My bad. That's what the error is. They must be plain objects. So we'll go back to action.type. So down there we see that count dot, right? So right here, what we could do is we want our app to re-render, right, every time that happens. So one thing I could do is when the component did mount, let's do this. I should take us back to kind of where we were. So sorry, I'm going to undo. Just kind of thinking out loud here. So let's kind of keep this internal state here real fast. Count 0. And then this will still be this.state.count. So this line, this says every time the store subscribes, call this function, right? So that's why when we click, we see it get logged down there. I have it repeated up here, so it's doing it twice. So it's doing that. And the reason this instance is increasing is because we changed our click function to just dispatch that thing, right? So what we can actually do here,
Subscribe.
yeah. Oh, let me, boop. So instead of console.logging, what if we did this dot set state, and I haven't totally replaced this set state yet, with the store state. So we're going to replace our app state with the store state. And then that works again, right? So what we essentially did was we built this Redux store that uses this reducer. All it does is take an object, well, it takes two objects, right? It takes our old state and then an action, and based on that action, changes it. And then we said, hey, every time the store changes, I want you to do this thing, right? And force the app to re-render. This whole business here with monkeying with the state and this is the part that React Redux. Notice all we did was import create store from Redux. We're not using the React Redux library yet that we installed. React Redux provides to us something called connect that will connect our Redux store that we created. It'll connect that to our app. So let's import connect, and I think we also need the actually before I do that, let's move this. We're going to move these two things to just a component called counter. If you're using my thing, it's RC, React component. It doesn't have this .state anymore, so this is going to be just this .props.count, and this is going to be this .props.click, right? What? Yep. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go over here, because remember, click here and the count are parts of the app state. So all I'm going to do here is say the count is this .state.count. That's the number, right? And the click is going to be this _click. So I'm just passing this function and this state.count here as the two parameters to our counter component. So then we need to import counter here. So I'm just reorganizing things a little bit because I know that Redux is going to make us wrap our app in a provider, and then in order to map the, it's going to have to be, I'm not going to be able to all do this in one component. So there, it works, right? We're still using our Redux store that we made. We're still kind of modifying the app's state with it. We're going to refactor that in a minute. But the idea is we have this counter component that all it cares about is that you gave me a prop called count and you gave me a prop called click. And when you click the button I'll call the prop that you gave me click. That's like an action. I'll call this action, and I also have this prop that you gave me that has some data in it. That's all this component cares about, right? If we wanted to use prop types, maybe we should import prop types. Prop types from prop types. There we go. That was hard. Static prop types. So click is a prop types dot number and func and count is prop types dot I think it's number.
So this is going to be that, what happens when you put like is required?
It just means if I don't specify it, that it'll give me a warning that this is static, not state. Can't resolve prop types? Prop types.
And your input as well, maybe? It says input prop.
Oh yeah, this is because I can technically call it whatever I want. Could have called it Fluberry and it wouldn't have complained. Some people do this like this, T. So just abbreviate type. Makes it a little terser. So this is so that let's go ahead and put is required. What happens now is that if I forget one of these, I'll get a warning in my console that I forgot it. See, that's the warning there.
Do you have to set the static prop?
It needs to be, you either need to set that it's static, or you need to go down here and say counter.proptypes equals. That's what static does. Otherwise, if I just put this here, this is not a properties. This is not a property of the counter class itself. It's a property of each instance, like state would be. That's what static does. I will commit right now. Okay. So at this point, we want to say that we want to make this counter component use the Redux store and not have to do this monkey business that we did over here in app with subscribing to it ourselves and setting the state and all of that, right? So let's see if I can recall how to do this. I know that let's see, where's their dupe usage with React. Close that up. So it talks about presentational and container components. We'll come to that in a minute. This component here is purely presentational. We're going to actually make a container component for it in a minute. But in the meantime, oh look, that's kind of what we've got, right? A func and a string to show. What we're looking for is the okay. So they do this in the index.js, but we could do this in the app file as well. So in the app here, where we created our store, we're also going to import provider from React Redux. And we're going to wrap our app in a provider component. Take all this, move it up into here. And we're going to say that the store that we're providing it is, of course, the store that we made right here, right? So there's the store. That's essentially what they've got there. We're just doing it in our app file rather than in the index.js. So, but we're still wrapping the app component with the provider. So at that point, what we should be able to do, magically make the store available to all container components in the application without passing it explicitly. So we, what that means is this store variable only exists in this app component, right? So for it to become available to other components, I would have to keep passing it down as props. That's messy, and I don't want to. That's the whole reason I don't want to have to do any of this. Is I want to declare my store in one place and then be able to connect other components to it. That's where the connect function comes in, right? So we're going to go over here to our counter. At this point, we can actually delete this state business here and this. So we're going to be dispatching this event. If we look here, whoops, that's not. Shit. Shit. Kind of getting ahead of myself, I think, maybe. Well, let's just pretend we're not going to pass this here anymore. I know that much, right? So let's just do that. Get rid of that. It's going to complain that I didn't do it. Let's say that the count's not required anymore as a prop. So it stops complaining. Okay, so nothing's going to happen. If we look at our Redux tab, though, I wonder if it shows up. Oh, I probably have to follow these instructions to make it available. Yeah. That's easy.
You have to require an extension on each project?
What I need to do is I need to make our store like available to the DevTools extension on the window there. Let's add that piece. If I add that, then it should. Cool. Actually, there it is. So now when I click this button, you can actually see the change. It went from 0 to 1, then on here it went from 1 to 2, and then from here it went from 2 to 3, here it went to 3 to 4. What's really neat is you can tell it to skip one of these, and then look what happens. This last one, oh, you can't. You can't skip it. Oh, you could jump it. I don't know what that means. I don't know what jump means. It's fun. I don't know.
I like buttons.
Yeah, I do. So anyway, this is fun. There's a lot of different ways to view this. You see what the state looks like at each time you modified it. Because remember that your reducer, because it takes the entire state and the action, at any point you can stop and look at what the state of your application would be at each action. There's a lot of really cool debugging that this enables because that idea is so simple. It means like when there's an error, you can stop and you can look at the entire state of your application and see why it's not what you expect it to be and what caused it to get that way. So everything the user does is recorded as actions in here.
So it's almost like a breakpoint.
Yeah. You can, and what's really cool is you can record them and play them back. So you could record a bunch of actions and then play them back, and then you go make some changes to your code and then play those actions back again. It's really neat. There's some videos on that, like time travel debugging and stuff that I'll share with you all. So we did this, right? We when we click this button, we're still dispatching this event. But our counter component is no longer connected to the store, right? Because the store is totally separate. So what we need to do is we need to import connect from React Redux, right? And this connect function I have to remember exactly how connect works. It takes 3 arguments. Let's go look here. Next steps. I don't need to do all those. We have a reducers. Reducers, they make this a little more complex than it has to be. Container component. Here we go. We import connect. Yeah, okay.
Is that the one down there, the const physical to-do list?
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
So what we can do is we're going to just make a function here called map state to props. So this function here, map state to props, right? It's going to take in the state. This is our Redux store. This is the state from our Redux store. And what we're going to do is we are going to just return an object that's going to have the properties that we want. Get visible to previous state. No, it's just state.count. So now this.props.count, we should, I have to actually call connect, give it this function, and then this we don't have yet. I wonder if null, is it going to be mad at me if I do that? It sure is.
Something like outside of it.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. It's not this, it's this.
Why is that broken up? Like,
So connect returns a function that when you call it,
so those are the 2 arguments, is not state to
Yeah.
and null, and then it's
and then it returns a function, and then I call that function giving it a component. So what I could do here is be like this. I could say const connector is this. And then I could say const connected counter is equal to connector, and then I give it the counter component that we made that's totally dumb, right? It doesn't know any better about anything. And then now what we export from this file is the connected counter. So this is now connected to the store, right? So these right here, let's call this fooberry. This is this.props.fooberry now. What this function does is it maps our Redux store, which is this variable here called state. It maps this to props that this component will get when we connect it. So whatever we return here, these props are going to get passed to there. The one thing that we didn't do here is null. The second argument here is where we pass functions to be actions to this component. So let's commit, and then we'll go do that. But I'm not going to call this fooberry. I'm going to leave this.
Map to props, is that how you get stuff from the store into the previous file?
Yes. Yep.
So it's like the props, but it's just
Yep. So this function here. So a lot of times, this is what I've done in the past, is I've just taken this and just passed it here as like that. And then get rid of this. And just passed it directly to that. And then you don't have to do all this business here, right, that I did. I could just take this put it there, and then get rid of this. And then all of this just becomes what I export, and it's just that. Right? So it's the same thing. All I did was take out the intermediate variables I was assigning things to. So there's this first function that maps the state to the props. But now we want another function that will map actions. So this, right now, our app component has this click action in it to pass to the counter. We don't want our app to be aware of what the counter does and what actions the counter needs to do. That should be in another place, not in our app, right? So we're going to get rid of that from here. And we're going to get rid of this from here. So the app is just, all the app does is gets wrapped in a provider with our store. And otherwise, it doesn't care. It just says, render the counter. I don't care, right? Over here in counter now, we need to provide a function, and it takes what did we do basically like this? What did we cut from here? To make sure that I'm not talking out my foo-foos. Dispatch type increment. Okay, cool. That. We're going to cut this and delete that. So this argument gets the state here, and then this one, dispatch, and what we're going to return is, what do we call it? Click. And it's going to call dispatch with type increment. Right? So all we did was we moved from here. I'll call to the store.dispatch directly, right? Instead, this function right there is going to get the dispatch as an argument, and then we'll call it, and we'll dispatch the action that we want to dispatch. And it has this name click. So these two match here, right? This could be Fooberry. These two things. It's still Barry, okay? So unless I goofed, I believe we should be in a working state, and I totally goofed. On click listener should be a function. Instead got type object this dot pipes dot click. What happened? What did I do? Oh. Okay. I have to do that. There we go. Cool. So this is our counter component connected to the Redux store very indirectly. We see there's no direct line between this counter component and the store that this file created. This connect function here, it takes two functions, one for mapping the state to props and one for matching actions, dispatchers to props. And it provides a counter prop and a click prop. Here's click and counter. Provides them to this component. So that correlates to connect. Connect automatically subscribes this component to the store now. So now, notice I'm never having to trigger a render myself. Redux is going to do this connect function here in React Redux is going to trigger re-rendering for me whenever the store changes. So I don't have to manually think about that. All I have to do is create a store, right, which we did here, create a reducer function, which we did here, and then any components that we want to connect to that store. And notice the store here uses the reducer function, right? The store has the initial data, This is sort of the initial state here. When we create our reducer, we give it the initial state. So it has that, and then we say create a store with that reducer, and then now anywhere else in the app, no matter how deep in the tree of components we get, we can map that component to a piece of the store. Not we can pick the pieces of the store that we want, and we can map them to props in a component, and we can do the same thing for actions. Yes. So this is the second one. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to commit real fast. And then I'm going to break this into something more idiomatic, right? Something that's more traditional, the way, like I've done this in like the simplest way I think we can do it. Now I'm going to do it in the way that you more often see Redux stuff organized. So hopefully it helps make the more broken up one make more sense, because now we've seen it like in a compressed small space. Because right now, like let's say we had another component that we wanted to be able to increment this counter, we'd have to specify this multiple times in different places, right? But I don't want to have to think about what this is directly. I just want a function that returns that I can use anywhere else, right? That's where action creators come in. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and organize our folders up a little bit. We're going to have presentation, and containers, so our counter component right now, this top part of it is very much a presentation component, right? So what I'm going to do is come over here and make a new file, counter.js. Oh, I guess I could have called this components. It doesn't matter what you call it. I guess, yeah. So we had a counter. Oops. Actually, I'm gonna clear this out here. Counter. So I'm gonna take our. That's the one. This one. I'm gonna cut this part of it. I'm gonna put it here. I'm gonna get this part of it, these two parts of it here. Alright, so we just needed that. Okay. So this component should be all good. This component now is going to import, first let's move this here to containers, right? So we've got this counter component here in containers. So our app is going to import counter from containers. Oops, that's bad. Cool. So what we have here is this very dumb component, right? That doesn't. All it says is you're going to give me a function that I'm going to call when I get clicked, and you're going to give me a number, and I'm going to show it. That's all it cares about, is doing this. It's a very simple component. Then we've got this other file that's also very simple. And I'm going to say const map state to props is this function, right? And this will take map state to props. What do they call it? They call it map dispatch to props. Const map dispatch to props. Oops. I misplaced comma. There we go. So it still works, right? So this is where we map the state to prop, and this is where we map the dispatching to props. What's that? Dispatch.
Map dispatch
Oh.
to props.
Oh yeah. So long as I spell it right, wrong in both places, right?
I always spell that word wrong.
Dispatch.
Every time.
So let's take this right here, and let's see what they did here. They have this toggle to do. Let's call this increment, right? Increment. Where does increment come from, right? Import increment from up a directory / actions. So over here in our source, let's make a new file called actions. And this is where we're going to put any of the actions that we can do in our whole app. And now that we put them here, we can use them in any component, right? So you might have multiple places where that trigger the same action. So this is why we would put them in a separate place. So this is like a list of all the behaviors that our app could possibly do. So here in actions, let's say export const increment, and this is just a function that returns this, right? Return. Return. This is just a function that returns that right there. What did I do? Oh, that. There we go. So, still works, but we've moved the action to its own file, right? Now, they also, for the store, usually you have like a file called store.js. So, let's see, there's a better. Right, so here's our kind of action creators. That's what I was talking about. Just exports function that returns actions. They're still just doing that. That's fine. The simplest case. Let's make a new folder here. New folder. Reducers. New file here. Index.js. And our app, here was our reducer, right? Oh, this way better. Const counter equals that. And then here, export default counter. That's our one reducer, right? So we should still works, but we've broken it up now. So what's going to happen is you might end up having a reducer that if you had an application that had 20 different things to do, you're going to have 20 different switch statements in your reducer. That's going to get messy, right? So what you can actually do is you can break your reducer into multiple functions, and then they give you this function called combine reducers that combines them all back together. And the idea is that if your store has like 5 keys on it, like blog posts, users, blog comments or something like that, 3 different things. For each one of those keys, you can make a reducer that just reduces that tree of your state, and you can separate it. So that's when you see combined reducers. That's what that is.
And that's why you were able to call just the reducers folder. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, because what you'd end up doing is in here, maybe I'm going to make one called counter.js, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's refactor this a little bit, where the counter it goes back to just being a number, right? So let's take this here. Let's go back in here. So we go back to making this just a number. If I could type correctly here. Stop goofing off. So we go back to this being just so simple. And then what we want to do, and let me find the combine reducers. So now what I would do here for the counter is export default counter. And now I would import counter from counter. Now we have that function that just handles that one part. I would also import combine reducers from Redux. And now that I have that, and I have both of them. What's that?
There's another key in the first import.
Thank you. Thank you. Combine reducers. And I give it an object that just has counter, right? This is like saying counter, counter, right? So for counter, here's the function that handles that part of the state, which remember is just a number. So that's just like saying counter, and this is a number here. But I'm just going to say counter. Now I think that I called this counter here, and I think back over in, there's our creators and our reducers, there's that, where is it, in our container component, there, counter. So this should work still. So now, because we broke this up, we could add other things to other pieces to our store and just write a reducer that just handles reducing that piece, and then we would just have to add them to this list here, like users, the list of or people. So we're going to do that. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to do that. So I have a little more I want to add to this app. I want to be able to add multiple people and then have a counter per person. We're going to try to do that.
One of the things that really confuses me is the multiple counter.js's being in each.
Yeah, so we could rename this so this is something I do. I don't always break them up like this, right? What I might do is rename this one to be counter view. Oops, that was the wrong one. Rename this to be counter container. And then rename this one to be counter view. Let's put them in the same folder and call it components. Container. Oops. So now this is a component, really. Move it to there. Let's go ahead and get some good organization going on. Well, where did I put that styles folder?
That's intensive, but it'll be that first one.
Yeah. Don't need this anymore. So maybe like we also new folder actions. Move this in there. Anticipate growing, more actions. For now, I'll just call that index.js so nothing changes there. So our app component here does this, that. We're not going to import this from here anymore. This will be /container. This will be up a directory reducers. Okay. And that it's not counter anymore, it's counter container. We'll still call it counter here, right? So I just call it counter there, but it exports the counter container. The counter container is going to import the /counter view. We can still call, this view again if we want. Doesn't matter what we call it here. And then the index here needs to find the app in components now. And these are in styles now.
In the slash before styles.
I do, thank you. This is not up a directory, it's the current directory. Cool. And we are missing the app style sheet, right? Because these styles. So what I like to do, if I'm going to just all put them in one folder, is just say import /app.css right here. Whoops. Semicolon. There we go. There we go, back in business with some really nice, clean organization. So that's how these things all kind of fit together. It's a lot. It's a lot of pieces. I have no expectation that anyone really grokks this in the first week. I'm still like, this felt really good for me doing it this time from scratch because I've barely made sense of it in the past. I think doing this kind of solidified it a little bit for me. So
You use it often?
I've used it in one project. That said, most React developers, this is the default go-to for them. I've always used another library called MobX that is much simpler to set up and think about.
Can you show us that?
I can. But out in the real world, like when you're out there like doing like React jobs and stuff, Redux is so prolific and ubiquitous that you're going to want to know it anyway. So let me commit the work we've done here. Tomorrow we will do an additional, we'll do another demo where we're going to add people. We're going to have like a form where you can type in a person's name, and then there'll be a counter for each person, and we'll increment and decrement for them. So maybe we can almost think of it as like a scorekeeper. Like I'm playing games with some people, I can add their names, and we can increase their score and decrease their score per person. And we'll use Redux to do that tomorrow. And then, as we work on little demos in class, we'll just try to slip a little Redux in there here and there, see if we can start to make more sense of it by just practicing it over and over again. which will be good for me because I've kind of relied on MobX as a crutch because MobX is so easy to use.
Yeah.
But I know that like out there in the wild, everyone uses Redux. MobX seems to be gaining in popularity a little bit, but Redux definitely has the momentum.
I got the monsters and I'm not gonna
I did too.
lie.
I did too. So, but we've got the video, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the video, and I'll publish it here.